The Celestial Arcanum sect leader said, Thousand Chance City, this city isn't too far from here, and the people from that sect have appeared in Thousand Chance City before. This Thousand Chance City might be their territory because our people don't even need to talk about entering, just getting close to this place would cause them to disappear. Thousand Chance City? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian said, I'll make a trip there. The Celestial Arcanum sect head looked at Yi Xian. He hesitated for a moment before saying, the old man doesn't recommend God Lord to take the risk. If something happens to you, our God Nation will collapse. Now that the God Nation didn't have Shaoqi, if something happened to Yi Xian, it would undoubtedly be a disaster for the God Nation. What the God Nation needed the most now was a person like Yi Xian who could hold the fort. Don't think that the God Nation was harmonious. If there wasn't someone who could hold the fort, the God Nation would immediately fall into chaos. The human heart was the most complicated thing. Yi Xian smiled faintly, it's fine. If I want to leave, they won't be able to stop me. He wasn't bragging. With the immeasurable sword, he believed that as long as he wanted to run, ordinary people definitely wouldn't be able to catch him. And it wasn't normal unless the other party had an expert like the Demon Lord. The Celestial Arcanum sect head wanted to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly said, it's fine, I'll go personally. With that, he looked at Shangguan Xian'er, I'll leave the God Nation's matters to you for the time being. Shangguan Xian'er said solemnly, it's best not to take risks. Yi Xian smiled, if I can't beat them I'll run. Shangguan Xian'er, Yi Xian looked at the Celestial Arcanum sect head, where's Qinji City? The Celestial Arcanum sect head was silent. Yi Xian smiled, don't you know my ability? If I want to run, ordinary people can't do anything to me. But we don't know the exact situation of Shaoqi, so I have to go. The Celestial Arcanum sect head was silent for a moment, then he pointed his finger and a scroll appeared in front of Yi Xian. This is the route. Yi Xian nodded, I'll leave the God Nation's matters to the two of you, wait for my news. Also, if someone from the Shenhuang Great World comes, be sure to inform me, understand? Shangguan Xian'er nodded, understood. Yi Xian nodded slightly, then turned into a sword light and disappeared at the end of the sky. Shangguan Xian'er looked at the end of the sky and said softly, he and His Majesty are really friends. The Celestial Arcanum sect head nodded, both of them are swordsmen, they focus on the pursuit of the heart, so neither of them will play those tricks. Also, can't you see? Our city Lord Yi really doesn't have much interest in the Divine Lord position. If it wasn't for His Majesty, he might not have come to be the Divine Lord. Chapter 675. I won't use any external objects. Yi Xian's face darkened. How can you say such shameless words? I'm a swordsman. You think I won't use a sword? Fight you with my fists? Are you still human? The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. That sword of yours isn't an ordinary sword. It's not fair. Yi Xian said indifferently, your realm is so much higher than mine and your physical body is so much stronger than mine. Is that fair? The middle-aged man was silent for a moment before saying, you won't use those two swords. I'll fight you with one hand. Yi Xian smiled. You don't have to use one hand either. Let's make a bet. I won't use these two swords to fight you one-on-one. If I win, you'll tell me where she is. How about that? The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. After a moment he nodded. Deal? Yi Xian immediately put away the executing heaven sword and soul-suppressing sword. The middle-aged man said, let's go somewhere else. With that he turned around and left. Yi Xian didn't think too much and followed him. Soon the middle-aged man brought Yi Xian to a training field. The training field was huge and there was a thin light screen around it. In the middle of the training field, the middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. Attack. Yi Xian stomped his right foot hard. Boom. The entire ground shook violently. In the surroundings, the power of countless earth veins gathered toward him. At the same time, the power of the earth spirit contained in the great Tao Law was released toward Yi Xian. Yi Xian clenched his right hand slowly. Rumble. A powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body. At the sight of this, the middle-aged man's eyes became slightly solemn. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly leaped up. The next moment he punched the middle-aged man. Burial Fist. After giving up on the sword, he directly used the Great Tao Law and Burial Fist. These were two of his trump cards. In the face of Yi Xian's punch, the middle-aged man had a solemn expression in his eyes, but he didn't show any fear, nor did he dodge. He took a step forward and blasted his fist out. Heaven-shaking punch. As his voice fell, the two powerful forces directly collided with each other in the most brutal way. Rumble. In an instant, with the two of them as the center, the ground within a 3-kilometer radius was directly shattered, and the thin barrier of light in the surroundings also collapsed at this moment. A powerful force wreaked havoc in the surroundings, causing even the space to distort. It was an incomparably terrifying sight. A moment later, the surroundings returned to tranquility. Yi Xian and the middle-aged man looked at each other from afar. Both of them had a trace of blood at the corner of their mouths. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian. "What kind of punch is that?" Yi Xian grinned. "Burial fist." "Burial fist," the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. "Very strong." Yi Xian laughed and said, "You are also very strong." Chapter 677. Below him, Yi Xian's entire body started to tremble madly as if he was having an epileptic fit. It was extremely shocking. Moreover, the blood within his body seemed to have been stimulated by something, and it flowed madly within his body. At the same time, strands of powerful bloodline energy ceaselessly stimulated his body. The old man's expression was extremely gloomy. There's something wrong with his bloodline. Bloodline. Below him, Yi Xian's entire face started to warp. At this moment he still had a bit of consciousness and he felt extremely bitter in his heart. He didn't dare to rashly activate this bloodline energy because he wasn't confident in his ability to control it. But now, the bloodline energy that he'd absorbed earlier had actually tried to change his bloodline, and it had undoubtedly touched the reverse scale of his bloodline. Thus it had erupted. He was able to sense that his bloodline was getting angry. Yi Xian was speechless to the extreme as well. A bloodline that had even become sentient. "Are you trying to kill me?" As he sensed that the bloodline energy was becoming more and more frenzied, Yi Xian hurriedly looked at the old man. "Help me suppress my bloodline." The old man immediately jumped down and pressed his hand on Yi Xian's shoulder, and a powerful force instantly pressed down upon Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian hurriedly cooperated, and he utilized the profound energy within his body to start suppressing his bloodline. Just like that, after around 2 hours, the bloodline within Yi Xian's body gradually calmed down. The old man heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this scene. He wasn't afraid that Yi Xian's bloodline energy would harm Yi Xian, but he was afraid that Yi Xian's bloodline energy would affect Yi Xian, because he'd sensed that Yi Xian's mind wasn't normal. Moreover, Yi Xian's body was emanating dense killing intent. He knew that if he didn't suppress Yi Xian's bloodline energy, then Yi Xian might go berserk. Once Yi Xian went berserk, he wasn't fully confident in his ability to suppress it. After all, Yi Xian had quite a few extraordinary treasures in his possession, especially the World Prison Pagoda. He was extremely fearful of it. Fortunately, Yi Xian had regained his composure. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes, and they were completely blood red. The old man's expression changed when he witnessed this scene, and he became vigilant. But soon Yi Xian's eyes returned to normal. Yi Xian stood up. As soon as he stood up, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body, causing the surrounding space to tremble. Yi Xian was stunned. Then he looked at his own body. After a while he said excitedly, "Divine Realm! Divine Realm!" His body had advanced from the Emperor Realm to the God Realm. Yi Xian clenched his right hand. In an instant, a powerful force gathered on his right arm. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Chapter 678. Yi Xian did not stop this time. He slashed at the white-robed man fiercely. He held the executing heaven sword in his hand. Therefore, the white-robed man did not dare to fight head-on like before. Because of this, the white-robed man retreated again and again. In the end, he retreated tens of thousands of feet. Flying swords flew around Yi Xian and the white-robed man. At this moment, the white-robed man suddenly squatted down and put his hands together. In the next moment he suddenly jerked forward. Rumble. The surrounding space trembled. Yi Xian was directly thrown hundreds of feet away. The white-robed man stared at Yi Xian. At this moment, his expression was incomparably ferocious. "I really underestimated you. I never thought that your physical body would actually—" Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. A sword arrived. Boom. The white-robed man was instantly slashed and there was another deep wound on his body. The white-robed man looked up at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him and slashed again. This time it was not the executing heaven sword but the soul-suppressing sword. This sword slash the white-robed man could not dodge at all. He could only take it head-on. He crossed his arms. Boom. The white-robed man instantly retreated hundreds of feet away. As soon as he stopped, his expression changed drastically. This was because the soul in his body was actually being torn apart. Soul tearing. The white-robed man looked at Yi Xian in horror. What are you? At this point his voice stopped abruptly. This was because Yi Xian appeared in front of him again. Yi Xian slashed down again. At this moment, the soul-suppressing sword in his hand had become the executing heaven sword. This sword slash caused the white-robed man's expression to change drastically. He was just about to attack when at this moment, the soul in his body was being torn apart. It was impossible to achieve divine soul unity. At this moment Yi Xian's sword had already slashed down. The white-robed man's body was directly cut in half by Yi Xian's sword. The white-robed man's soul was about to escape, but a mysterious force indeed locked him in place. The white-robed man glared at Yi Xian. You? Yi Xian directly pressed his sword against the white-robed man's soul. The white-robed man was greatly shocked because he discovered that his soul was actually starting to dissipate. Yi Xian looked at the white-robed man. Many people die because they talk too much. The white-robed man stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian said, I ask you answer. If you answer well I can let you live. The white-robed man looked at Yi Xian and sneered, You underestimate this sovereign too much. This sovereign. Yi Xian suddenly said, All right, I respect you. I won't ask any more. As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his hand and slashed with his sword. The white-robed man's soul was directly absorbed by soul. Yi Xian took the white-robed man's storage ring and left. But before he could take a few steps, a cold light suddenly slashed at the back of his neck. This cold light appeared without warning, and Yi Xian did not even have time to react. The cold light had just penetrated half an inch into Yi Xian's skin when Yi Xian's entire body disappeared on the spot. When he reappeared, he was already hundreds of feet away, and the back of his neck was bleeding profusely. Yi Xian looked not far away and it was already empty. But he knew who it was. It was the female assassin who had once tried to assassinate him. The Heavenly Gates assassin. Yi Xian closed his eyes slightly, and the space Dao Law appeared between his brows. Soon, the space within a radius of hundreds of thousands of feet suddenly trembled. A moment later Yi Xian opened his eyes, and the surrounding space returned to normal. The female assassin had already left. If her attack failed, she would escape thousands of miles away. This was what an assassin was like. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian turned around and left. Not long after Yi Xian left, a woman in black suddenly appeared where he had been standing. This person was the Heavenly Gates assassin who had previously attacked Yi Xian. The woman was silent for a moment, and just as she was about to disappear, a sword light suddenly appeared behind her. The woman's expression changed and she turned around to slash down with her saber. Boom. The woman instantly retreated hundreds of feet. The moment she retreated, she wanted to hide. At this moment, the space around her began to shrink layer by layer, and finally formed a spatial cage. This spatial cage directly trapped the woman. At this moment, Yi Xian appeared in front of the woman. He glanced at her and said, I know how to hide as well. The woman suddenly made a move, and Yi Xian blocked it with his sword. Bang! The saber in the woman's hand directly shattered, and at the same time, Yi Xian's sword directly pressed against the woman's brows. Yi Xian looked at the woman. Do you want to live? The woman was silent. Yi Xian held his sword and gently pushed it forward. The sword penetrated half an inch, and in an instant, blood gushed out of the woman's brows like a fountain. Yi Xian looked at the woman expressionlessly. Seeing that you're a woman, I'll ask again. Do you want to live? The woman was silent. Just as Yi Xian was about to stab his sword in, the woman suddenly said, Yes. Yi Xian was slightly startled. He didn't expect the woman to answer like that. He sheathed his sword and said, Do you know what to do? The woman looked at Yi Xian. I don't know. Yi Xian said, Follow me. The woman was silent. Yi Xian said, Hand over a wisp of your soul. The woman was still silent. Yi Xian's expression gradually turned cold. This is your last chance. The woman opened her palm, and a wisp of her soul flew in front of Yi Xian. She was a smart person and knew what Yi Xian was thinking. After a moment of silence, Shengguanxian said softly, I saw the 9th young lady just now. Yi Xian nodded. I asked her to come and help me. Shengguanxian lowered her head slightly. Do you need me to leave? Yi Xian shook his head. No need. You continue to do what you are doing, but in the future she will be the leader. Her words are my words. Shengguanxian nodded. Understood. She knew that her position had changed from the first to the second. However, this was already the best result. As long as she didn't completely lose this position, The Shangguan family wouldn't decline because she was still by Yi Xian's side and was still in the inner circle of power. It was just that this power might become less and less in the future. At this time Yi Xian suddenly said, "Miss Shangguan, during this time, you have helped me a lot, but you may not be so clear about your own position, so I need someone of my own to help me. Of course you can rest assured that you are still you. You are still the same as before, but I hope you understand one thing, and this is also the last time I will tell you. In the future, my orders cannot be disobeyed, especially in front of others. Do you understand?" Shangguan Xian nodded slightly. "I understand." Yi Xian nodded. "You may leave." Shangguan Xian bowed slightly, turned around and left. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. He took out a Dao realm sword and was about to devour it, but at this moment, a powerful aura suddenly came from the sky outside the palace. An enemy attack? Yi Xian frowned slightly. In the next moment he was already outside the palace. Above the palace, a man fell straight down. The man carried an extremely powerful force. At this moment, Yen Dao suddenly appeared in front of the man and pulled out his saber. Boom. The man was forced to stop. At this moment 12 people appeared behind the man. These 12 people were all at the peak of the god state, and their auras were extremely powerful. Yen Dao looked at the man and the others and frowned slightly. "You are?" The man in the lead sneered. "What? You don't even recognize our Dao execution army?" "Dao execution army?" Hearing this, Yen Dao's face sank. At this moment, the man suddenly looked at Yi Xian and pointed at Yi Xian angrily. "This person killed my Dao execution army, how can he be the God Lord? He deserves to die." Because there weren't any treasures that could resist Yi Xian's executing heaven sword for now. Yi Xian looked down coldly. "What? Is there no one else?" Right at this moment, an ethereal man in a luxurious robe suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The man had long hair that hung loosely on his shoulders, and he had a scholarly bearing. Everyone on the huge ship instantly knelt down on one knee when they saw the ethereal man. "Greetings, King." "King." Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. Needless to say, this man in the luxurious robe was the Black-Yellow Great World's king of the northern region. Had the main character finally appeared? Yi Xian looked at the man in the luxurious robe, and the man in the luxurious robe looked back at him. Yi Xian gripped the executing heaven sword tightly in his right hand and remained silent. The man in the luxurious robe sized up Yi Xian and nodded slightly. "Not bad indeed. No wonder this king's subordinates have died time and time again." As he spoke, he glanced behind Yi Xian and said softly, "The chaotic universe, the spiritual qi is indeed abundant." Yi Xian looked at the man in the luxurious robe. "This is not your main body." The king of the northern region looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "You want to kill me?" Yi Xian held the executing heaven sword in his right hand and said nothing. The king of the northern region suddenly shook his head and smiled. "Naive." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. "I know you have a trump card, but you don't know the difference between us. Perhaps in the future your achievements will not be lower than this king's, but right now, you are no match for this king at all. Do you believe that?" Yi Xian smiled. "All I know is that you have to give it a try. What if you win?" "Ha!" The king of the northern region suddenly laughed. "Win? You are so naive. Yi Xian, this king asks you, how will your chaotic universe fight against the northern region?" Yi Xian smiled. "I will die if I fight and I will die if I don't. Why shouldn't I fight? What do you think?" The king of the northern region looked at Yi Xian. "This king once gave you the choice to live, but you gave it up." Yi Xian dusted off the dust on his chest and smiled. "I would rather die standing than live kneeling." The king of the northern region nodded slightly. "You have the pride of a swordsman. Not bad." As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. "Don't worry, when we get rid of the person behind you, you will be able to die standing as you wish." Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. "The person behind me?" The king of the northern region smiled. "Isn't it the woman in the plain dress behind you?" Yi Xian's face darkened. "You are targeting her." The king of the northern region said softly, "If she is not dead, I will not be able to rest easy." Yi Xian suddenly said fiercely, "I will bear the consequences of my own actions. If you have the ability, come and find me. Why are you going after her?" Chapter 685. Return the executing heaven sword? Yi Xian was taken aback. He hadn't expected the sword martial sect to ask him to return the sword. Yi Xian looked at the trembling executing heaven sword in his hand. "What do you think?" He naturally respected the executing heaven sword's opinion. He didn't want to force the executing heaven sword to do anything to him. Xiaoling, suddenly said, "It's said to cut her." Yi Xian was speechless. The executing heaven sword trembled, and a sword will slashed at the woman in white. The woman in white frowned. With a wave of her sleeve, the sword will was immediately forced to a stop. Yi Xian understood the executing heaven sword's intention. Yi Xian looked at the woman in white. "This sword doesn't seem willing to go with you." The woman in white looked at Yi Xian. "It belongs to the sword martial sect." Yi Xian waved the executing heaven sword in his hand. "I don't think the words sword martial sect are written on it." The woman in white smiled. "Looks like you don't want to return it." Yi Xian looked at the woman in white. "I think you don't just want the sword, right?" The woman in white smiled. "You're smart." Yi Xian suddenly raised his hand and swung his sword. The woman in white narrowed her eyes and punched. Rumble. The space around them trembled. The woman in white retreated hundreds of meters, and Yi Xian also retreated dozens of meters. As soon as the woman in white stopped, her fist cracked and blood spurted out. Yi Xian glanced at the woman in white. "Get lost." The woman in white looked at Yi Xian. She didn't say anything. Suddenly she disappeared. In an instant, 4 flying swords appeared around Yi Xian. Yi Xian frowned. He raised his hand and swung his sword. Boom. The 4 flying swords were shattered by his sword. At this time, the woman in white suddenly appeared in front of him and punched at his head. Yi Xian didn't dodge. He punched with his left hand. Boom. In the blink of an eye, the white-dressed woman retreated another 1,000 feet. After the lady in the white dress stopped, she stared at Yi Xian. "God state physical body." Yi Xian looked at the woman in the white dress. He didn't say anything and disappeared. The woman in the white dress narrowed her eyes. With a soft cry, she slammed her palm forward. Boom. A powerful force swept out from her palm. However, as Yi Xian's sword slashed over, her power was instantly shattered. The white-dressed woman's pupils constricted. She tapped her right foot lightly and instantly retreated thousands of feet. As soon as she stopped, a flying sword appeared in front of her without warning. At this moment, a sword suddenly appeared in the white-dressed woman's hand. She raised her hand and stabbed. Boom. The flying sword was sent flying by her strike. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of her, and at the same time, a sword was slashing towards her. The white-dressed woman's expression changed drastically.